Cold calling is not dead. You heard it here first and last, folks. Cold calling is not dead. Everything has changed in cold calling except for one specific thing, which I will share.
Welcome to Driving Growth, the go-to-market podcast for traditional B2B companies that are looking to build systems to create predictable revenue. In short, turning their company into a revenue factory. I'm your host, Steve Whittington, president of Roadmap, a believer in one simple truth. Sustainable growth is not an accident, it is engineered. And my company, Roadmap, is a builder of go-to-market systems. On today's show, Leslie Venetz. She is an author. She has over 15 years of corporate sales experience, and she is now providing guidance, coaching, and systems for outbound selling. This is a jam-packed exercise full of actionable insights. Enjoy the conversation. Leslie, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks, Steve. I'm so excited to be here.
I'd like you to tell, in your own words, your journey of how you've become this well-known voice on LinkedIn. And then in that story, I want to hear, and everybody loves hearing this, is what made you fall in love with sales? So take it away.
Ooh, I'll maybe answer backwards because I feel like I fell in love with sales against my will.
Okay.
I did not want to be in sales. I really thought that sales was kind of a profession that you should be embarrassed by.
I've heard that before from many. Yes. Okay.
Yeah. And so I grew up in Montana, as we were talking about before we went live. And I moved to Chicago. So from like a town of 60,000 to a city of 6 million without a job, was applying for all of these jobs very naively, still thought I would use my college degree in the work that I did. So I was applying for all of these like marketing and nonprofit management jobs. And they were like, great, we can offer you $28,000. And if you do an exceptional job, maybe in a year, you could be eligible for an up to 3% raise. And I was like, cool. I think instead of spending the rest of my life hungry, I am going to pursue a opportunity to have a little bit more control over my financial stability. So I took a sales job. And even when I took it, I very much had in the back of my mind, I'll do this for a little while until something better comes along. Like I did not plan to stay in sales at all. And I would say within 3 or 4 weeks, I went from, ew, sales is gross and slimy to, oh no, I think I might love this.
So what flipped it? What flipped the script there? Like what made you said, okay, like, so what happened? Did you land a big deal? Like what happened?
No, I didn't land a big deal within 3 weeks of doing my first sales job. I was in a very transactional environment, and so I was closing business, but it wasn't like, oh, I landed a whale and then that set me on a new path. No, actually, it was that I very much had it set in my head, like as a child of the 80s and 90s, growing up on like Glengarry Glen Ross and Wall Street and Boiler Room and all of that just like super toxic narrative around sales type of media. That sales was a profession that was about scamming people and manipulation and lying and maybe even stealing. And in those first few weeks on the job, I realized it was quite the opposite, that the salespeople that were most successful were the ones that were most benched in caring deeply about the outcomes that their prospects were getting and making sure that those were positive outcomes. And so I realized that it was a profession that was rooted in helping.
Right.
And that the skills that were making me thrive were things like listening and asking questions and like giving a shit. And I was like, oh, this is very different than what I thought it was. I'm actually quite good at this and I'm really enjoying it.
Right. Well, that is a realization that some people never get to, that sales is about providing positive impacts to the people you're serving. It's not about closing business. That is an outcome of doing that genuine care about the people that you're trying to serve.
Well
Well,
said.
obviously that sparked a long career in corporate, and now it's led you to being an entrepreneur, and you have your own agency. And I want to talk about that. You're specifically supporting the outbound sales method. And at Roadmap, what we do, we talk about like factory lines for like acquisition, retention, and expansion. Where do you see some gaps in how you're supporting them, like that they think along those three ways? Like, what is it that you're showing them that they need to do for acquisition specifically?
Yeah, I love that factory line analogy for two reasons. One is that something I work with teams on a lot when they are building lists, when they are building those ICP segments, is to not just think about where those quick wins are or who's most likely to buy now. That's really important. But if you have some of the historical data to tell you, hey, this is the type of company that's most likely to land and expand. This is the type of company that's most likely to renew. This is the type of industry that's most likely to refer you. So I love plotting from the beginning how to build lists and make sure that we are targeting accounts that are most likely to lead to, sort of long-term growth and be those good links in the chain. But the other reason that factory line analogy sat so well with me is that I teach a 9-step formula, like a blueprint to top of funnel excellence. And when I think about each of the 9 steps, sure, if you do any of them, you're going to get a better outcome. But if you do all 9 of them in a row, like if you stack those links together, that's where the true power, like that is where the excellence and the repeatability and the profit generating pipeline element comes from. So I love that analogy.
So would you say when you're working with organizations, the gap you're seeing is that they haven't thought through the entire customer life cycle as to what actually is their best type of customer for that life cycle?
I would say the biggest gap that I see is that folks write very, very product centric messaging
Sure.
instead of problem or outcome centric messaging.
Yeah.
And so that clearly has a knock on effect if you're just trying to like beat the drum on like, here's my feature, here's my feature. It saves time and money because you are then missing opportunities very early in the buying process, the sales cycle, whatever you want to call it, to connect the assumptions that people are making about the outcomes they'll get with reality and like with, where you want them to go when they're using your product.
Yeah, they're not creating user stories that are around impact.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah. Like when you've worked with startups versus big enterprises, do you see like is there differences as to what they need, or is there like a lot of similarities?
More similarities than differences. Interestingly, because I primarily serve the like 30 to 50 million like SaaS and services space, but when like billion-dollar orgs come knocking with a problem I can solve, I'm not sending them away.
Right.
And regardless of the size of organization, I always, always, always start with active listening. Because active
Yep.
listening is always a gap in every single sales organization that I have ever personally led, that I have trained, that I have done consulting work for, advisory work. So when we talk about what's the same, it's often a lot of those soft skills gaps. But if you don't have something like active listening nailed, it's pretty impossible to run a good discovery meeting, to do a good needs analysis. And so by teaching it with around a top of funnel excellence question, I do think it has really positive knock-on effects to the work being done middle of funnel and bottom of funnel. I would say the biggest difference I see is that more established organizations do tend to have more processes, whether or not they're right, whether or not they're repeatable. That's to be seen. But when I'm working with larger organizations, I think it's a lot more about like refining, perfecting what they already have. And when I'm working with earlier organizations, a lot of it is that they've often like brute forced their way to that 30 to 50 million. And now they're realizing, hey, if we like the age old, what got us here won't get us there dilemma.
Yeah.
They brute force their way there, and now they need to figure out how to make things repeatable so that they can hit their next big growth milestone.
So Yeah, so there'd be, perhaps a tired playbook in place that has the basics that could be used. But why do you think that active listening is such an underdeveloped skill if you're seeing it everywhere? What's the core issue behind why that hasn't been given attention that you think?
Yeah, a lot of reasons. I think one is that most people don't think that active listening is a skill. This is a debate that I constantly get into where people will be like, you're either a good listener or you're not. Like, I'm just not good at remembering names, or like, it's an innate thing. That is bullshit. Active listening is a skill, just like anything is a skill. And if somebody said, hey, I need you to have a, 80% like field goal. Like, I think I need you to hit 80% of your field goals every single time. You would know immediately that you have to go practice that in order to hit that goal.
Right.
Or if somebody was like, I want you to learn how to code, you would know immediately that you would have to take classes, that you would have to like do the work in order to master that skill. But for whatever reason, when we talk about softer skills like active listening, the default assumption is that it's something you're either born with or you're not. So it just gets dismissed as something that doesn't need to be given that sort of intentional and deliberate practice.
Right. That leads me to another question I have, or totally ties into this, is that you're trying to teach teams, in your words here, to talk with buyers instead of at them. And you're building this core skill set. So could you unpack how you do that?
I think the reason why organizations are missing it is because we're selfish. Like, that's sort of the brass tacks of it, right? Like, organizations think that they are amazing. They think that what they've created is amazing. Sellers think they're amazing. And like, that's not inherently bad, right? Like, it's so cool to be passionate about what you're selling. And of course, if you have created a company and created a product, like, you're proud of what you've created and how you're putting it into the world. You're proud of your company. But you have not earned the right to ask your cold prospects to give a heck about that. And so there is this huge disconnect that what most people are putting into the world is like, I'm your sales rep, our feature, our product, our, like, how many times have you gone to a discovery meeting and they start with a slide about like their executive team or where their offices are, when they were founded? I do not care, right? Like, here's the problem that I need to solve. The only thing that I care about is whether or not you understand my problem, and I trust that you understand it, and then I believe that you can solve it. Once you've convinced me of those things, sure, then I care about like, how long have you been around? Or you a fly-by-night sort of agency? Like, how big is your team? How big, right? Then I care about some of those questions that are more specific to the company. But beforehand, I only care about me and my problems. And so most organizations, like I would say 80% of organizations, are getting that piece wrong. So like, what I come in and teach starts with, hey, we need to look at our territory strategy, because we need to first start by using like firmographic, demographic, psychographic filters to create small segments within our territory so that we can be extremely clear on the outcomes that matter most to them, so that we can create messaging that's super specific to that segment and their outcomes, so that when we start our outreach, we are connecting the right messaging with the right person, hopefully at the right time because we're using some signals, and then hopefully on the right channel because we are using a multi-channel approach. But that causes that requires like a fundamental pivot in, how do I say the right thing to the right person? How do I meet them where they're at? How do I figure out how to get them at the right time? And none of those things have anything to do with how great we think our product is, or how great we think we are, or our company is.
Yeah. I want to pivot a bit. I found a stat about you, is that you've made over 100,000 cold calls. Is that true?
Over 250,000.
Okay, so my stat is old. Okay. Anyway, how do you think the tactics have evolved, and what is the, like, there's still foundational habits that I still do. What are your foundational habits that you think is still driving success, and is cold calling something that is you feel relevant in your tactic tool belt?
Oh yeah, 100%. Cold calling is not dead. You heard it here first and last, folks. Cold calling is not dead. Everything has changed in cold calling except for one specific thing, which I will, which I will share. Even in the last year, I think cold calling has gotten significantly harder. I don't think cold calling has ever been as difficult as it is today, right now, even with all the tech and data and tools. What has changed that's really cool are some of like the dialer technologies, you know, like an Orem or a Nooks, or even some of the ones that folks have embedded in their software. That's incredible, especially when you have access to like predictive tools or the ability to do like phone ready leads so that you are more likely to use your time on the phone actually connecting with people. That's all incredible. I think something that makes cold calling especially difficult now, that I sure as heck did not have to deal with when I started cold calling, is that people just aren't in offices.
Yeah.
The way they used to be. And really, like, even in, you know, I would say like 2018, we started seeing some really big companies like I remember Coca-Cola was one of the first ones that did it, that they got rid of voicemail.
Okay.
Right. So I think like we started seeing this transition in like the late 2010s, where it became increasingly difficult to reach people in offices, where access to mobiles became increasingly important. And then, you know, over the last like 7 years with the pandemic, with the like increase of remote work, if you are not calling people on mobiles right now, you're not really reaching anybody unless you happen to be in an industry like manufacturing where a lot of people are still in office. But like, I think that's more of the exception, not the rule anymore. And if you are running a large team, like if you are trying to scale your operations and you are not investing in both a data tool as well as a dialing tool, like you're sort of wasting your reps' time. So, I mean, I think that fundamentally makes it a different type of cold calling atmosphere than where I was when I started, and I was cold calling CFOs during the Great Recession, and I would make 200 to 250 calls a day without a dialer on a stack of paper leads, and I would maybe reach 4 people, and 3 of them would be like, "Are you insane? How could you possibly ask me to spend money right now?" So I'm not saying it was like that was not easy. But I still think that in a lot of ways, like that was an easier environment than what reps are up against right now.
Yeah, you know, you're absolutely right, because gosh, I go back to 1997 cold calling, and everybody picked up. You'd have the yellow pages, and you'd have to actually get yellow pages from a different area, whatever, but or find lists because you were just starting to get a few things on the internet, but they always answer the call. But what's the one thing that remains true though in all of this?
Yeah.
Right.
The one thing that remains true is that I still use the same call opener template now that worked 15 years ago, and it is relevant reason for the call. And the reason that keeps working is because the first thing out of your mouth is something that matters to the person that's answering the call.
Right.
Sorry, go on.
You'd have to change that on a per target list, of course, right?
Totally. That's why it's a template. Yeah. Yeah. That's why it's not like, here's the specific thing you say. It is the method with which you,
the methodology,
you write. Totally. Yeah. I would even argue that that's more important now, because to your point, I think when I was like, you know, making cold calls 15 years ago, I could kind of get away with like, oh, hey, Steve, how's it today? Where are you at? Like you could get away with some of those niceties. I mean, also I spent like a good chunk of my career calling like power plant managers in the South, so they were down for a little bit of a chat.
Yeah.
And the appetite for a chat with a stranger is at an all-time low right now. So you need to get to the point. You need to be sure the point matters to the person you're talking to, and you need to get there fast.
Hey, you're listening to the show because you want to figure out how to grow. The first thing that I do with CEOs is I determine what the true cost of growth is. That becomes the baseline from which you make all your decisions from. That is part of the mathematical model. That is part of our toolkit. But today, you can go to weareroadmap.com and book me. And in 30 minutes, we can give you a really good understanding of what your cost of growth is. Now, let's get back to the show. As you're building high performance teams, like what is some of the non-negotiable things that you feel you need to do to make sure you create a healthy, high output sales culture?
Yeah, I am obsessed with culture because I grew up in really, really toxic sales environments. I would say that most of what I learned how to do right now, later in my career, it's because I saw it being done wrong early in my career, and I saw how it impacted me and my psychological safety and my ability to show up as my best self on the call. And I saw how many people just left sales, like just gave up on the profession because they were like, ew, if this is what it's like, then I don't think that this job is for me. And I hate that because sales is such a good profession. So what is maybe the most important thing when it comes to building a good culture? It's trust. Like I think trust is eroded at like every level in sales right now. Like sellers don't trust their sales leaders. Sales leaders don't trust their sellers. Leaders don't trust their like board and ELT. ELT doesn't trust their sales leaders. Buyers don't trust us. We don't trust buyers, right? Like trust is just crumbling. So if we want to repair this broken system, if we want to maybe at some point live in a world where sales is not continually ranked as one of the top 3 most hated professions in the world, the least that we can do as sales leaders is create a culture of trust internally and then hope that has a ripple effect.
Right. Fair enough. Now, this has been a great conversation, and I am going to assume that large parts of it, or some parts of it maybe, is maybe the more accurate term, are going to be or are in your book.
The book.
So, yes. So tell us about profit generating pipeline. That's the title of the book coming out, or that is launched, I guess, as the time of this podcast. So tell us about it.
The book is called Profit Generating Pipeline, a proven formula to earn trust and drive revenue. Anybody can purchase it at salesledgtm.com/book. And as of the time of the publishing of this podcast, there's still some like freebies and stuff that you can snag, but only for the next couple of days because we are ending the, sort of like pre-launch festivities. But it is part 1 are like sales leadership foundations, a lot of what we have discussed here. Part 2 is that 9-step formula that my clients pay me tens of thousands of dollars to teach them. I am giving it away for folks to try to embed in their own sales organizations because I so deeply believe that my legacy, the work that I am able to put into the world, has the ability to transform sales into a more respected and a more inclusive profession. And so that is a huge part of why I was called to write this book and put this knowledge into the world.
I know you've sort of dropped where you can get the book, all that sort of stuff. But if people wanted to follow more of, everything Leslie, where would they go?
Yeah, you can follow me on LinkedIn. So the book is at salesledgtm.com/book, but I am on LinkedIn. So find me there for daily sales wisdom.
What I liked about all the different insights that Leslie unpacked, it's clear to me that she has systems, she puts systems in place with metrics that you can have accountability and you can create a revenue factory, all that sort of stuff. What she's driving into is the soft skills that aren't talked about as much in the sales of science. It's like, how do you do active listening? How do you have all these different soft skills? How are you inquisitive? How are you hungry? How are you managing the culture that will then get you the numbers? That is often overlooked, but so important. Very, very impactful for me to hear that, who is a very data-driven individual. So don't forget the soft skills that actually create those outcomes. If you've liked what you've heard, go to weareroadmap.com/podcast and download the Revenue Factory Toolkit, in which you receive the mathematical models and framework for building your own go-to-market system, in turn, turning your company into a revenue factory. Also, subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts, with new episodes dropping the first and third Wednesday of every month. I'm Steve Whittington. Thanks for listening. Keep building your revenue factory one brick at a time.